The term first resurrection in Revelation 20 has caused more than a few to question or flat out disbelieve a pre-trib rapture stance. And yet we don't really have to look too far to understand what it means. By this I mean, let's exclude some rationales. First resurrection, is it the first ever? No. 1 Corinthians 15 states that Christ is the first fruits of the dead. Okay, well maybe it's the first since Christ's, and therefore it's the rapture because it's the first since Christ, so there's nothing else that comes in between, so that must be the rapture. And yet, there is a resurrection even in the pages of Revelation that comes before that, respective to the two witnesses in Revelation 11. So it can't be the first since Christ because there is one in Revelation that comes before that. So it's not the first ever, it's not the first since Christ, it's not the first in the book of Revelation. So what does it mean? The writer of Hebrews uses the same terminology to help us understand what the first means. If the first covenant, old covenant, had been faultless, then no place would have been found for the second covenant. It's a contrast between old and new, first and second. In Daniel's time, Daniel 9:27, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In Daniel's time, there was no new covenant, so there also was not an old covenant. There was just the covenant. Daniel was writing about the old covenant before it was old, because it only becomes old when you have a new to replace it. Think of this as buying something. I have an item. One item, it's just an item. I buy a second of that item. Now it was a first and a second. I have a pair of shoes. It's just a pair of shoes. I buy a new pair of shoes, and now that first pair becomes old. First old, second new. In talking about the covenants. But they are specifically called first and second in Hebrews 10. The same type of thing applies to Revelation 20. You have a first and a second in the same chapter. The first is trib saints only, specifically stated to be trib saints only. And they are excluded from the second resurrection in the chapter. The second death hath no power. Resurrections, judgment seats, synonymous terms, are exclusionary or inclusionary, depending on the way that you look at it. People can only be included in one judgment seat. There are specific preconditions, timing of belief, things like that, that make people applicable for one judgment seat or eligible for one judgment seat and one judgment seat alone. So those who participate in the first resurrection will not be heard of the second death. They're not going to stand before the judgment seat related to the second death. The word resurrection has a positive connotation. It means to life. And yet it's called the second death instead of the second resurrection because unbelievers from all ages will stand before it and ultimately be thrown into the lake of fire, which is an eternal death rather than an eternal life. There are two resurrections in the chapter, first and second. That is why it's called first. Not because it's the first ever, not because it's the first since Jesus, and not because it's the first in the book of Revelation, because none of those statements are true. It is the first because there is a second, and they are being contrasted. It is as simple as that. It has nothing to do with a pre-trib rapture. The rapture does not occur in conjunction with the Revelation 20 resurrection. It is specifically stated to be trib saints and martyrs only, which means they came to faith and died for their faith within the confines of the 70th week. That is not a hybrid event. It does not include a people who were simply changed. It is a resurrection, and it applies to a people group that is 70th week specific only. First compared to second, both are in Revelation 20.